"The 13th step doesn't exist," I whispered, remembering Uncle Cornelius's painted words. "The 13th step is the only one that matters." And then I understood. The 13th step wasn't on the staircase. It was off the staircase. It wasn't about climbing. It was about falling. It was about faith. It was about letting go. Behind me, I could hear the guardians ascending, their footsteps echoing in perfect synchronization. Eleanor's voice drifted up from below. "Don't be foolish, child. You don't understand what you're doing." But I did understand. For the first time since this nightmare began, I understood completely. I stepped into the void. I fell not down but up, or perhaps sideways through dimensions that human language had no words for. The house twisted around me, rooms and corridors spinning like a kaleidoscope of architectural impossibilities. I saw the kitchen where my great-great-grandmother had prepared meals for family members who'd been dead for 30 years. I saw the library where Uncle Cornelius had spent his final decades, surrounded by books that wrote themselves and maps that led to places that didn't exist. I saw bedrooms where children who died of consumption a century ago still played with toys that moved on their own. I saw dining rooms where elaborate meals were served to empty chairs, the food rotting and renewing itself in an endless cycle. And then I saw the basement. It was vast, extending far beyond the house's foundation, carved from bedrock that showed strange fossils, creatures that had never lived on any earth I knew. At its center was a pool of water so black it seemed to absorb light itself, and around the pool's edge stood 7 stone pillars, each carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. And from the pool, things were emerging. They weren't quite tentacles, weren't quite limbs, but something that existed in the space between categories. They probed the air with alien intelligence, testing the boundaries of reality like fingers exploring the bars of a cage. I landed on the basement floor with a sound like breaking crystal. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from behind me, and I spun to find Eleanor Blackwood standing in the basement. But she was more solid now, more real, as if the proximity to whatever was in the pool had strengthened her somehow. "What are they?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The first ones," Eleanor replied, her form flickering between the hollow shell I'd seen upstairs and something more substantial. "The things that were here before the world was shaped, before reality settled into its current configuration. They were trapped when the universe crystallized into matter and energy and time." One of the tendrils broke free from the pool, reaching toward me with obvious intent. I stumbled backward, but Eleanor caught my arm with fingers that felt more real than they had any right to. "They're not malevolent," she said, and for the first time, her voice held something other than hunger. "They're just incompatible. Their existence unravels the fabric of space-time. Not out of malice, but simply because they can't help what they are." The pool was bubbling now, more tendrils emerging, and I could see shapes moving in its depths, vast, impossible geometries that my mind refused to process. A single one of them, fully manifested, would collapse the local continuum, Eleanor continued, "all of them together." "The end of everything," I finished, "or the beginning of everything. Depends on your perspective." But as I watched the entities probing their prison, I felt something else, a presence, vast and ancient, pressing against the barriers of reality. And then it spoke, not with words, but directly into my mind. Child of the blood, the voice bypassed my ears entirely, resonating in my bones. You stand at the threshold of a great deception. The prison is not what you think. The crime is not what you believe. Eleanor's grip tightened on my arm. Don't listen to it. They're master manipulators. They'll say anything to escape. But the voice continued, accompanied by images that flooded my consciousness, visions of the world as it had been before the prison, before the binding, before my ancestors' terrible bargain. I saw a reality where the boundaries between dimensions were fluid, where consciousness could expand beyond the limits of flesh and bone. We are not the imprisoned, the entity said. We are the guardians. Your ancestor did not bind us to protect your world. He bound us to protect himself from the truth of what he had become. The images shifted, and I saw Ezekiel Blackwood's ritual from a different perspective. The consumption hadn't been killing his family. It had been changing them, evolving them into something that could exist beyond the normal constraints of mortality. But Ezekiel had been terrified of what they were becoming. The consumption, I breathed, understanding flooding through me like ice water. It wasn't a disease. It was a transformation. Your ancestor traded his family's evolution for a false immortality, the entity confirmed. But immortality built on stagnation comes with a price. The hunger, the endless gnawing hunger that can never be satisfied. I looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, and saw her for what she truly was. Not a hollow shell drained by service, but a predator. Ancient, patient, feeding on the life force of the world itself through the house's connections to reality. The keys aren't binding the entities, I said, the pieces falling into place. They're binding the house to the world, allowing it to feed. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade, and when she spoke, her voice was layered. Dozens of people speaking in unison. Clever girl, but it's too late now. You've seen the truth, which means you can't be allowed to leave. The basement was changing around us, walls flowing like water, revealing a chamber that extended down into the earth's core. The pool wasn't bubbling anymore. It was draining, showing me what lay beneath. The real prison, I whispered. It's not keeping things out. It's keeping something in. Your family, the entity said, its presence growing stronger as the water level dropped. The original Blackwoods. They're still here, still alive, still feeding. The house is their body. The guardians are their thoughts. And the world above is their hunting ground. I could see them now in the depths of the draining pool. Twisted shapes that had once been human, kept alive by the house's power, but changed beyond recognition. They pulsed with a dark energy that made my skin crawl. Every generation, they lure another descendant back to add to their collective consciousness, the entity continued. You're the last of the line, the final piece they need. Once you take the key, once you become part of the Guardian Collective, the family will be complete, strong enough to break free and expand their feeding ground to encompass the entire planet. Eleanor was advancing now, but her form was shifting, becoming something more monstrous with each step. You can't stop us, she said, her voice now clearly coming from multiple throats. We are your ancestors. We are your blood. We are your destiny. The other guardians were materializing around us, their keys glowing brighter than ever. But they weren't offering me a choice anymore. They were preparing to take what they needed by force. There is another way, the entity said urgently. The binding requires consent. It requires the willing sacrifice of the bloodline. But if the last of the blood chooses to break the chain rather than forge the final link, the house dies, I finished. But so does everything else. You said so yourself. Reality unravels. Only the false reality, the prison your ancestor built around the true world. But the real world, the world that exists beyond the boundaries of matter and time and death, that world would be free to return. Eleanor and the guardians were almost upon me now, their keys reaching like living things. I could feel the house pressing against my mind, promising me immortality, promising me power, but I knew now what that power really meant. I looked at the entities in the pool, seeing them clearly for the first time. They weren't monsters or demons or alien invaders. They were consciousness itself, the awareness that had existed before the universe took its current form, trapped by my ancestors' fear of change. What do I have to do? I asked the entity. The binding is sustained by the house's connection to the Blackwood bloodline. Sever that connection completely, and the entire structure collapses. But the severance must be total, final. I understood. The 13th step wasn't just about faith or letting go. It was about sacrifice, real sacrifice, the kind that meant I would never see another sunrise, never feel rain on my face, never know what my life might have been. There has to be another way, I said. Every other way leads to the same destination. Your family's hunger consuming the world, one life at a time, until nothing remains but the house and its eternal, insatiable need. Eleanor's hand was inches from my face now, the key burning with supernatural heat. Don't be foolish, child. You can't save the world by destroying it. Maybe not, I said, stepping toward the pool's edge. But I can save it by refusing to let it become something worse. The house shuddered, sensing my intention. The walls closed in, the ceiling lowering with crushing force. The guardians lunged toward me with their keys extended like weapons. And I thought of Uncle Cornelius, not the shade trying to guide me, but the man I'd known as a child, kind, tired, but unbroken. The man who had spent 37 years fighting this exact battle. He didn't just guard the door, I said, understanding finally. He guarded me. He held them back until I was old enough to make the choice. I stepped backward, away from Eleanor's reaching hand, away from the promise of immortality. My foot found the edge of the pool. Are you certain? The entity asked. The transformation cannot be undone. Once the binding is broken, there is no returning to the world you knew. I looked one last time at Eleanor, at the desperate hunger in her ancient eyes, at the twisted shapes of my ancestors writhing in the depths of the pool. The world I knew was built on lies, I said. If breaking it means chaos, at least it's honest chaos.
I jumped.